So let's talk about the hypothetical spec script. Let's suppose I want to get on a show. What would be my method to doing that? Would I write about an episode that already exists, a continuation of one?
Yeah, in television these days, to be in consideration for getting your first writing job on staff of a show, which means you didn't sell your own original show, you got hired to write for someone else's show, which is still the much more likely scenario for a new writer, right? People are writing original pilots and hoping to sell them and get them, in front of an audience, of course, and there's always a chance that that could happen, but it's, of course, very rare. Today, people writing original pilots, within the industry, people that have managers and agents writing original pilots, if they don't already have a big track record writing for television or film and a lot of success, they're probably writing that as a writing sample to try and get a job on staff of a series. And what has changed in the 20 years since I was doing that is that back in the 90s and before, the traditional way to get hired on staff of a series was to write what they would call a spec episode of an existing show. Just some successful, relatively new show that people in the industry liked and respected. Like Seinfeld was the big show to do during its second season, is about the right time, where people are writing their own ideas for an original Seinfeld episode that hopefully reads like a really good episode of Seinfeld. Like you read the script and you go, this feels like it could be on that show. It would be a really good episode of that show. They capture the voices. It's very funny, et cetera, et cetera. Not easy to do really well. Easy to do mediocrely. Not easy to do well enough that people will go, wow. Which, of course, that's what you want when you're a screenwriter. It's to get that wow is rare and sought after, right? So back then, very few people wrote original pilots if they weren't already established because there was nothing to do with them. They weren't looking for original pilots as writing samples as much. They wanted to know that you could write in another writer's voice an episode of a show that already existed, which of course is what you would be doing if you got hired on staff. For some reason, in the last 20 years, that has shifted a lot. What I've heard anecdotally is where in those days, 80% of it was specs of existing shows. Nowadays, it's more like 80% are original pilots that people are writing. And that is what is getting them managers and agents and getting them their first jobs on a series, on a writing staff. People still do write specs of existing shows. I think you definitely need to write them to get into some of the big fellowships that some of the studios and networks offer, which are great ways to try and break into TV writing. But what's much more in vogue is writers writing original pilots for series that they came up with, and those pilots become their main writing sample or samples that they use to try to first get a manager and then get an agent, which you usually kind of have to go step by step, and then have their managers and agents sending them to production companies, showrunners, executives at the studios and networks and streaming services to try to get you noticed as a potential TV staff writer.
And so how long would these spec scripts be? I mean, so it's going to be half-hour content or?
Yeah, it's going to be the same length as a typical script for the show you're writing for. Or, well, if it's original, a show of the ilk of what you're writing. In other words, if you're writing a 1 hour, clearly a network-style drama, it's going to be about, it's going to be like a 45-minute because there would be commercials. And then how many pages that translates to, they say a minute a page. You can go a little long in a spec. I would say a 1 hour pilot, maybe 60 pages would probably be the max you would want to go for an original pilot. You're really trying to sort of copy what successful shows that are similar to yours would do in terms of length. So it's really helpful to read scripts, not just watch episodes of the kind of shows that inspire you that you would want to write something in that genre, whether it's like an HBO type show or a Netflix type show. Nowadays, those services have shows that can have different length episodes and different length scripts so that they're not a standard 21-minute half-hour comedy on ABC kind of thing. It's a little more, there's some flexibility, I think. So you don't have to be too nervous about the exact right number of pages, but generally you're emulating what is standard for the kind of script that you're writing.
And why do you say it's so hard to make a great spec script? It's easier to make a mediocre one. What's the comment?
Well, when you're writing a spec episode of an existing show, I think it's easy-ish to write something where the characters talk kind of how they talk on the real show, and you have the kind of jokes that you can imagine they would kind of have, but maybe they're not great jokes, but they're just kind of sort of okay jokes, and the kind of story and kind of behavior of the characters that is their typical behavior. It's not so hard to sort of mimic that it's hard to mimic it in a way that's as good or better than the actual produced show is. Because really for one of those scripts to stand out, I was always told it has to actually be better than an average episode. It has to feel like, why haven't they done this episode? It's like a great idea, it's perfect for the show, it's really funny, it's really memorable. If it's a comedy, obviously, you're going for the funny. And that's just hard to do really well. It looks easy, which is why I try to do it. It looks easy to write a show that you know that's a good show. You come up with your own ideas for stories for an episode. But to do it on a level that someone would hire you based on it is not easy. And normally the show you wrote it for is not going to hire you. They're probably not even going to want to read it. They probably will be tougher on it than any other show would be because they know their show so well. And they probably aren't looking for writers because they're already on the air and a hit. So typically when you're breaking into television, you're breaking in with a staff writing job on a brand new show that no one's ever seen before. You may not even love the show, but it's where they offered you a job based on reading your stuff. And it may be a show that gets canceled in its first season because most of them do. But that's kind of like the life of a what they call a baby writer, a writer breaking into television and working on staff. But most of that doesn't apply as much today because people are writing original pilots instead of specs. But obviously it's really hard to write an original pilot that impresses people too, perhaps harder because now you're coming up with characters and a whole situation that they don't know anything about, and you have to make them care about these characters, be entertained, be intrigued, and all that kind of stuff, and all of the problems of the show have to be really compelling. Whereas if you're writing a spec episode of an existing show, a lot of that has already been done for you, right? You just have to write a variation on something that someone else has already established. And maybe that's why nowadays those aren't valued as much, because people can say, well, you didn't have to do as much to do that. On the other hand, when you write on staff of a show, a big part of your job is mimicking the voice of the showrunner, being able to execute the show in a way that they would like, the way they would have done it, which is not a skill that every writer has. So to show you can write somebody else's show in their voice really well, I think still is a very valuable thing. But the industry is more interested in original pilots for writing samples, despite that, I think, these days.
But you say it's rare that, let's suppose Seinfeld, I'm writing, it's still in existence, and I'm writing that I'm submitting this to, and thinking that I'm going to be in the writer's room for Seinfeld. No, I'm submitting it for Friends or something.
Well, you're not even submitting it for Friends, you're submitting it for some show that hasn't even been on the air yet. I mean, that's the reality, because your agent would be the one doing all the submitting, right? So first you have to impress an agent enough to get an agent, but once you have an agent, they're going to be submitting these new potential writers to all those brand new shows that just found out they got a series order, and now they have to staff up. The shows that have already been on the air, they already have a staff. They may have one person leave and they fill one vacancy, but basically they're already there. So you're almost never going to get on a successful existing hit show that you love or that you would have written a spec of. You're going to use that spec to get on some brand new unknown show that you may or may not love or may not be right for, but they thought you were right for it based on your script, so there you go.